But of course, the big story that is dominating headlines around the world is what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia. We are reporting that the United Nations Security Council has voted to hold a special session of the General Assembly today to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is part of Western efforts to isolate Moscow and comes after Russia vetoed a conventional Security Council resolution on Friday condemning its invasion of Ukraine. The United States UN ambassador procedure allows the 15 members of the Security Council to set up an emergency session in the General Assembly. It means that many members of the General Assembly will be able to voice their opposition to Russia's actions, and in effect will be a global opinion poll on President Putin. Also, news coming in this morning that the Ukrainian delegation have arrived at the Belarus border for those conversations with the Russian delegation. So that's the latest that's coming out from that area. Let's now, of course, talk more about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We're joined by Tokyo Sexwale, who received his military training in the Soviet Union and later became the president of the South Africa-Russia Business, Culture and Science Association. Good to have you on the program. Thanks very, very much for your time.
Good morning, Leanne. Thank you very much for having me here.
Absolute pleasure. Tokyo, let's get a little bit more context. Obviously, giving just an idea that you did get training in the Soviet Union days and also leadership in that position of the Russian commerce. But in terms of your relationship with Russia, Ukraine, perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit more there.
Well, Leanne, let me say there's a tragic situation unfolding before us in the world, a very dangerous one. But at the same time, there's been excitement about certain things in the world. In the same part of the world is Europe. Last night I was watching my own team, Liverpool, playing against Chelsea. The whole Europe was exploding. It was an atmosphere. You cannot believe that a few kilometers to the east of where the football was being played, there's a threat of a nuclear war. I say this because the president of Russia has activated and put his nuclear forces to the highest level of threat. But the same thing was done by NATO last week. Perhaps we should start by saying that there's a maxim, a certain old truism that says that when there's an outbreak of hostilities, such as war, the first casualty before the body count starts is the truth. You never know what is the causality, who was right, who was wrong. And of course, in the modern world in which we live, with high-speed telecommunications and information flow, televisions in the hands of people called social media, you never know now where lies the truth. Quite often it lies between the various protagonists or adversaries. For ourselves, we know that part of the world very well as members of the Liberation Alliance, the ANC, the Communist Party, and so on. Various other political organizations here in Africa who worked, who lived, who studied, who trained in the Soviet Union. Let me take my own case. Sent there by the African National Congress. I lived in Moscow. We did our theoretical trainings in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, at the time called Leningrad. For physical training, tanks, rockets, all those type of things, we lived in the south, in Ukraine.
Yeah.
In towns like Sevastopol, Odessa, where we spent some time. But most importantly, in a town called Simferopol. So for us, why do I tell this? The Russians and the Ukrainians welcomed us. They are brothers, they are sisters. It's so sad today to see them at daggers drawn, or at tanks drawn, or at rockets drawn. Yeah. Somehow this war has got, somebody must pause. The parties have got to find a way of sitting down and settling through dialogue, through discussion, through diplomatic engagements and other democratic ways of solving problems.
Yeah, already we can see it seems that that's already been pushed far too late. I mean, we know that there are talks that are going to be happening on the border of Belarus and Ukraine, and we'll see the delegations meeting there to try and find some resolution. But it almost feels like this has already been pushed too far, that the situation is very, very tense, especially with the threat of nuclear, the already amount of lives that have been lost, and the devastation that has been caused. So that goes without saying. But my question to you is, where does South Africa fall into all of this? Obviously, we have close economic ties with Russia through our association with BRICS, and that's something that, of course, we know. This is Brazil, it's Russia, it's India, it's China, and South Africa. But where would our allegiance lie in a time like this? Because obviously, South Africa, as you've explained, having ties with Ukraine and Russia in a way. But what would we do in a situation like this?
Well, like I said, the 3 Ts. In a democratic situation, dialogue, diplomatic engagements, and discussions, simple discussions. But the glimmer of hope for me and for all of us should be the meeting that is taking place on the border in Belarus. The fact that all parties have agreed to go to this meeting this morning. I know the Russian delegation arrived there yesterday, so the whole world has been waiting as to whether to find out that the Ukrainians will arrive. And of course, President Zelensky has agreed that the team should be there. Now, in that situation, our position should be to encourage those discussions face to face. It's not easy. I know sometimes there's been talk about mediating this issue. Mediation started in 2014, and it has gotten people nowhere. And when you talk about the United Nations General Assembly, as well as the Security Council, these are very important centers of discussions. But there's a lot of our own experience as South Africans when we've been going there for many, many years, and sometimes been rejected by resolutions of the Security Council, and sometimes accepted. There's a lot of hot air, a lot of resolutions which are not implemented, a lot of posturing. One hopes that people will just sit down and try to be equal to the task. Our position, the position not just South Africa, the AU and everybody in the world, is to give this meeting of this morning maximum chance of success. Because it's one meeting. If this meeting doesn't make it, then we can kiss goodbye to that part of the world for a long time. It is going to be remaining in that quagmire. So encourage face-to-face. There's no time for mediation now. Face-to-face, and that's what they do. And some of these people don't want anyone to mediate. Like I said, mediation has come and gone. This time, face-to-face discussions, they do the deal, agree on the cessation of hostilities, agree on holding the line where you are, don't move any further. Because it's not easy in a war situation where somebody believes that they've covered territory and then you say they should retreat immediately. First, it is the cessation of hostilities. And then it is stopping the movement of troops. And then it is to try to get both sides working together to monitor that truce. Because there was some kind of a truce in the past in this area called Donbass, which started in 2014, but nothing happened. And the war continued.
Yeah.
The application of things like sanctions, as the United Nations as Europe has done, have got their own positive as well as negatives. Now, for us, it is to encourage all the parties to sit down and resolve problems as quickly as possible, because there's 2 ways to sanctions. They cut both ways. Because if you say, I'm not going to sell my goods, say buses or trains or tomatoes, to so-and-so doesn't receive your goods, but also you must close down the farms, the factories, whatever is the source of the goods you're supplying. Therefore, it cuts both ways. You're going to have unemployment, reduction of trade, financial, mix up in the world, and countries which are not part of this thing are going to be caught in the quagmire. Let me just say, the last two world wars, World War I and World War II, emanated from the territory of Europe. Now, the Europeans are at it again, and this time around, with very sophisticated weapons, anything can happen with NATO and Russia. Therefore, we have a situation of whether it's the war itself or the sanctions, we are going to be affected. Because our own people, my father fought in World War II with his comrades coming from the southernmost part of the world. Therefore, we're going to be dragged in. Our position as Africa and other parts of the world, and I'm not talking to South Africa here, is to encourage these discussions and make sure that we hold people accountable to the agreements and decisions that they have arrived.
Well, absolutely, because I mean, at the end of the day, we are involved in whichever way, and it is going to cost us, in one form or the other. So, these talks that we're going to be seeing taking place between Russia and Ukraine are very, very important. But there, I suppose, is a question, and I think you said it right up front in the beginning of the interview, is that in between all of this, there is there's so much going on, and one actually loses sight of what the truth really is. And, we sit and we hear from the one side, then we hear from the other side, and then we almost get lost in the developments that take place. And there is a very, very long history behind where we find ourselves now. But I suppose the question that needs to be looked at is there any justification to Russia's security concerns that have actually led to the current invasion? I mean, so many people and countries saying this really took everyone by surprise, that Russia acted on its threats by going into the Ukraine. Now it's threatening nuclear. Now there's sanctions against it from all over the world. I mean, you speak of World War I and II, and many fearing that this is the brink of World War III. But I mean, is there justification from the Russians to be going in this manner?
Leanne, the matter is very, very complex and very complicated, because it's got historical aspects that goes right into, the ancient times. It's got implications that arise from the collapse of the Soviet Union, of which these two parts were part, Ukraine and Russia. It's got implications for what is happening in the Donbas area right now, as to whose territory is this one and whose territory is that. It's got linguistic, it's got cultural, because in the Donbas area, where you have the two republics, or the territories that have just declared themselves into republic, Luhansk and Donetsk, the majority of the population is Russian. So while the situation is very, very complex and complicated, I would say the following. It is also very simple, but then, of course, it does mean the solution is simple. What is the basic problem here? Two things. One, the Ukrainians have got the right of their own self-determination, the right of their sovereignty, the right of territorial authority and integrity. That's it, as a state. Nobody should question that. But at the same time, Russia has got very vital security, national security concerns. You will remember that at the end of World War II, the Soviet troops and the Allied forces who were against Nazi Germany went right into Berlin to liberate all of Europe. And that's where it ended. There were two organizations that came thereafter, military organizations, NATO and what they used to call the Warsaw Pact, in which were associated the group of countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Russia itself, and so on. Then the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was an agreement that that's the end of the Warsaw Pact. Now, NATO is not a church organization. It is not a charity organization. It's not just merely a military organization. It's a war organization. Now, the question that should be asked, and we should not be afraid of this, we must be forthright and open with our friends, whether they're Americans or Russian, whoever, because we're not involved at that level. Their problem is going to involve us. As I said, World War I, World War II were involved. What is the reason for keeping NATO today? There's no justification for NATO to be still in place. But what was the reason of moving 12, close to 30 countries now around Russia? You cannot try to collar and chain this bear, the Russian bear, with hot states that are hostile to it. These are national security concerns. Leanne, we cannot have around your home today people are coming, some drug lords, whatever. And I'm not saying that's the situation. I'm sure dangerous people coming to live next door. You're going to react. So the Russians feel cornered. The Russians feel also betrayed, that they were promised that NATO will not move an inch towards the east. But that has happened, and of course we even had countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which are in the Baltic area. All of them joining NATO. What for? What is the purpose of this? So now you found Russia, which had accepted the situation that's until 2014, realizing that now we're cornered. That people in that situation will act irrationally or rationally as they think.
Indeed.
And that's how you have us in this situation.
Wow.
But also another question that must always be asked. The United States, a powerful country which must pray for, it's time that the U.S. must play a lead as the upholder and champion of peace in the world. A country that is 10,000 kilometers away is so deeply involved in these matters and supplying weapons and so on. So the tension is being increased. That's what will make people react in the manner that we're seeing this reaction. No justification of that, but there's a causality.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Always fascinating listening to your views. Tokyo Sexwale talking to us about the Russia-Ukraine situation, of course, having lots of history and experience with the Soviet Union and Russia, and also training in the Ukraine as well, and just talking to us about how he views this particular situation right now. So thanks again to Tokyo Sexwale.